Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Sunday mornings at the Marxist Library. Before we start, I just want to make a quick announcement. We want to apologize for such late notice, but something unexpected came up and our advertised program with Dr. Kozin will not be held today. Please accept our apologies for this last minute change. In its place, we actually do have a good program on the same topic, which will be debunking the US-NATO narrative on Ukraine. And we're going to make this a session that is focused on discussion of the main points of the US-NATO narrative on Ukraine. And for that purpose, we're going to be changing the structure of the session today a little bit, where we will have, instead of our typical hour presentation followed by question and answer, we're going to have it broken up into 5 short topics representing the myths that we've identified, along with a lot of discussion. So without further ado, let's get started. So again, welcome everybody. I just want to remind you that this session is being recorded and that the video will be available in the next few days on both our YouTube channel, which is ICSS Marxist, and our website, ICSSmarx.org. My name is Alan Miller. I'm a member of the program committee that organizes Sunday mornings at the Marxist Library. And I'd like to start off by reminding everybody that we always welcome your input, feedback, and suggestions for topics and speakers. You can sign up for our mailing list and contact us directly through our website at ICSSmarx.org. Before the pandemic, we met weekly at the Nebo Proctor Marxist Library located in Oakland, California. Since the pandemic, we conducted our sessions online via Zoom, which has allowed us to open up our sessions to the entire world. We plan to resume our in-person sessions at the Nebo Proctor Library soon, while continuing to broadcast our sessions on Zoom as well. So, as well as our local participants and speakers in the San Francisco Bay Area, we now have guests and speakers from all over the world and from all over the US and other parts of the world. They endure the time differences to join us. So welcome again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and even good night to those of you who are participating today. Welcome to our session. For over 15 years, Sunday mornings at the Marxist Library programs have been a platform for diverse presentations on a variety of topics. This meeting is a comradely forum for political discourse and debate. The opinions expressed here today are those of the participants, and they do not necessarily represent those of the ICSS or the Marxist Library. However, we are united in our respect for the work of Karl Marx, and we believe that his work remains relevant today. Our motto is taken from Marx's 11th thesis on Feuerbach, and to quote, "The philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it." Okay, so again, what we're going to be doing today, for those of you who are just joining us, today's discussion is going to be focused around the debunking US-NATO myths on Ukraine. And the way we're going to conduct today's session is we've broken it up into 5 parts, each part corresponding to one of the myths that we've identified as core to the US-NATO narrative. We'll have short presentation on each of them and or a short video presentation. And then what we're really counting on today is opening up for discussion, having everybody chime in with their ideas, comments, and questions about it. So with that, I just want to open up by way of introduction with a quick showing one quick video, and let me get that set up for you to go. So if you'll bear with me for a moment.
You mean in audio? No.
Yep. Okay. I'm going to share my screen on this too. Okay, this is a piece by Caitlin Johnstone, who is a political commentator and a journalist based in Australia. And to sort of set the tone for today's topic, it's a very good piece that talks about the propaganda war that's going on. This session today is really important because, as we all know, there's a tremendous propaganda campaign that's being conducted. It's ubiquitous, it's relentless throughout the media, politicians, culture, and so forth. So let me just start off with a quick, we'll play this piece and whoops, go from there.
People overestimate the U.S. war machine and underestimate the U.S. propaganda machine. If you use Twitter and engage with the subject of the war in Ukraine at all, you've probably noticed a verified account called the Kyiv Independent pop up when you're scrolling through your feed, which puts out highly biased content in favor of the Zelensky regime and the Western powers which support it. If you use a desktop browser, it will probably look like this. And here there's a screenshot that you'll have to click on the link to look at the article if you want to see what I'm talking about.
Alan, do you want to?
You see the gray text at the top left-hand corner of the image which says War in Ukraine? That's a Twitter topic that the page's algorithm has recommended to me without my having subscribed to it, where posts of the Kyiv Independent feature prominently. This topic is being aggressively pushed on Twitter users around the world, showing up over and over again in their feed until they adjust their settings to remove it. As Pedro Gonzalez recently documented in Human Events, the Kyiv Independent was slapped together a few months ago with what the Committee to Protect Journalists called, quote, an emergency grant from the European Endowment of Democracy. The European Endowment for Democracy is a spin-off of the U.S. government-funded NGO, National Endowment for Democracy, which, according to its own co-founder, was set up to do overtly what the CIA used to do covertly, namely orchestrate coups and manage narratives to advance U.S. interests. A page on an NED website says that, quote, all EU member states are members of EED's board of directors, together with members of the European Parliament and civil society experts, end quote. So this is a media outlet funded by a government-run NGO being forcefully pushed in front of millions of Western eyeballs by a major Silicon Valley corporation that people have come to rely on for getting information about the world. In the same way Silicon Valley facilitates government censorship by proxy, it also facilitates government propaganda by proxy. The Globe and Mail reports that the Canadian government also put $200,000 toward Kyiv Independence funding. The outlet is being so loudly amplified by Twitter that not only has its Twitter account secured nearly 2 million followers since its creation in November, but one of its reporters, who calls the neo-Nazi Azov battalion his brother in arms, has gained 1 million followers since the start of the Russian invasion. Do you see how sophisticated just that one tiny component of the U.S. centralized empire's propaganda campaign is? How many seemingly disparate and unrelated elements it has? Multiple countries, NGOs, an ostensibly independent social media platform, an ostensibly independent news outlet. It's very difficult to see how any of it connects at all if you don't know where to look. And almost nobody knows where to look. This highly advanced perception management operation is happening all around the world about any issue the empire has a vested interest in. As anti-imperialist author and podcaster Justin Podart recently put it, the U.S. empire is based on the mastery of storytelling, making reality through propaganda. Truly, One of the most underappreciated and overwhelmingly powerful forces on this earth is the U.S. imperial propaganda machine. The ability to manipulate public thought, not just within the United States, but across vast swaths of nations, has allowed it to manufacture international consensus for whatever agendas it wishes to advance, in a way that eclipses the collective organizing power of official international bodies like the United Nations. We're seeing it today in the way unprecedented acts of economic warfare are being used to attack the economy of Russia with the goal of fomenting unrest and toppling Moscow. There was nothing inherent in Russia's invasion of Ukraine which called for this specific response from all the specific nations who have chosen to participate in it. But that's what ended up happening. And because of the power of the imperial propaganda machine, the public has gone right along with it, even as it sends their fuel and grocery bills through the roof. A big fuss gets made about the power of the U.S. war machine, despite the fact that it tends to fail at the rather important task of winning wars. This is partly because the empire often doesn't benefit from those wars ending quickly, and partly because it's hard to win wars when your entire military juggernaut is built entirely around generating the maximum amount of profit possible. Where the real fuss ought to be made is the truly jaw-dropping power of the U.S. propaganda machine. So subtle and sophisticated that even relatively intelligent and well-informed people fail to see the strings that are pulling at their mind, but so powerful it shapes the world. In the book Inventing Reality, published all the way back in 1986, Michael Parenti makes the following observation, quote, "For many people, an issue does not exist until it appears in the news media. How we view issues, indeed, what we even define as an issue or event, what we see and hear, and what we do not see and hear are greatly determined by those who control the communications world, be it labor unions, peace protesters, the Soviet Union, uprisings in Latin America, elections, crime, poverty, or defense spending. Few of us know of things except as they are depicted in the news. Even when we don't believe what the media say, we are still hearing or reading their viewpoints rather than some other. They are still setting the agenda, defining what it is we must believe or disbelieve, accept or reject. The media exert a subtle, persistent influence in defining the scope of respectable political discourse, channeling public attention in directions that are essentially supportive of the existing politico-economic system." End quote. That was long before Twitter, before Google, before Mark Zuckerberg, before Bill Clinton signed the Telecommunications Act, allowing for news media to be bought up and consolidated under just a few oligarchic megacorporations. And yet the exact same dynamic we see before us today was already in play, even back then. It's just gotten a lot more complex. You know, what's funny about this mad push to censor speech in the name of fighting Russian propaganda is that the people who are pushing it are directly admitting to a very important truth that they normally try not to draw too much attention to. The fact that it's very possible to use media to manipulate the way people think, act, and vote at mass scale. The part that they don't admit is that they themselves are far and away the very worst offenders in that area. The status quo worldview requires two entirely contradictory positions to be held simultaneously. That Russian propaganda has a corrupting influence on public thought, but that orders of magnitude more wealthy and powerful oligarchic media institutions do not. This is not sustainable. People are already struggling to keep their heads above water with the constant white noise torrent of psychological abuse they're being subjected to day after day. We're on our way to finding out just how much mass-scale psychological manipulation the human brain can tolerate before it snaps, if we don't find some way to change our collective relationship with mental narrative first. Or who knows? Maybe a healthy relationship with mental narrative lies on the other side of that snap.
Alan?
Hold on one moment.
The Russian military operation in Ukraine.
Okay, sorry about that. Just to summarize some of the points from the presentation that really have to do with the theme of this session, I think we're all aware of the fact that this has been an unprecedented media campaign, propaganda campaign around this war. John Pilger recently commented, as a journalist who has covered 6 wars in the modern era, that he's never seen anything like this in terms of the breadth and the scope of the media coverage, the propaganda that's being pushed on people. It's not something that is just happening by accident either, which I think really came out in this audio file that we just listened to. The government is spending tens of millions of dollars creating and promoting social media presence on the web to get these points across to people, and to sort of create an impenetrable wall of propaganda around the Ukraine war. At the same time, as many of you, I'm sure, are aware, people are being kicked off of social media, are being demonetized, are being censored to a degree that we also haven't seen, especially since the era of modern internet. So this is something that is really important. What we're going to try to do today is address some of these questions to really try and cut through a bit of this propaganda that's hitting us. What I'd like to do is that we're going to start off with our first myth, which is that Russia's special military operation is an unprovoked war of conquest against Ukraine. And I'd like Janet to go ahead and if you would give an introduction, then we'll show a short video.
Okay, so let me just mention about the previous audio. I posted that Caitlin Johnston article to the chat, and you can view it yourself and listen yourself. Okay, now to the myth, war of conquest. So Putin's February 24th speech announcing the SMO, Special Military Operation, remains true to this day. There was no mention of regime change or occupation. Given the decades-long NATO expansion and the 8 years of attacks on the Donbass by the Ukraine regime, Putin cited UN Charter Chapter 7, which is action with respect to threats to the peace, breaches of the peace, and acts of aggression, Article 51. It says, quote, "Nothing in the present charter shall impair the inherent right of individual or collective self-defense of an armed attack, if an armed attack occurs against a member of the United Nations, until the Security Council has taken measures necessary to maintain international peace and security. Measures taken by members in the exercise of this right of self-defense shall be immediately reported to the Security Council and shall not in any way affect the authority and responsibility of the Security Council under the present charter to take at any time such action as it deems necessary in order to maintain or restore international peace and security." Then there is another, this collective action where Donbass, which is a non-UN member, this is not, I'm not reading from the UN Charter now. If a non-UN member and a UN member make a treaty, then the UN member can take this kind of action on behalf of that non-union member. And that's what happened, UN member. That's what happened. Both the Donbass, or those two people's republics, requested recognition by Russia, and Russia recognized them. And there was a treaty to agree to that. what the myth or what the propaganda from the West has to do with is that the Russia violated Chapter 1, Article 2, Principle 4 of the UN Charter, which says, quote, all members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, or in any other manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations, period, end quote. So to paraphrase, on February 24th, Putin said the objectives of the SMO will be demilitarization of Ukraine, denazification of Ukraine, and Ukraine will be a permanent neutral state. Did Russia have other options? I personally think not. Russia had been pushed against the wall. Russia had tried to work with the West for decades, only to be shunned and demonized. And the US has basically been carrying out the 1992 Wolfowitz Doctrine, which was widely criticized as imperialist, as the document outlined a policy of unilateralism and preemptive military action to suppress potential threats from other nations and prevent dictatorships from rising to superpower status. So far, Russia has been successful with the first objective of the SMO and some of the second. So demilitarization, that's been the focus, or it seems like the focus of the first of Russia so far. So, and speaking of conquest, prior to 1654, Ukraine was a very small territory. Over centuries, Russia and the USSR annexed to Ukraine most of its current landmass. And I want to share my screen. Hold on, let me get this. Somehow my share screen is not working again. Let's see what happens. Is that being shared?
Yes, it's showing. It's
Okay,
showing.
good. Is it, should I make it smaller, bigger?
It's fine, just go ahead.
Okay, so you see here, the orange is the Ukrainian territory in 1654. And then between 1654 and 1917, the Russian czars annexed territories to Ukraine, which includes Kiev. And then in 1922, Lenin annexed also territories to Ukraine. That's the blue. And then in 1939 and 1945, Stalin annexed additional territory that includes Lviv, that's the green. And then in 1954, Khrushchev annexed Crimea. That's was in 1954, and that's in pink. So, okay. So now, Alan, you said you were going to play a video. I don't know which.
Well, if you have more to go, why don't you go ahead? Because I want to actually have a little discussion too. So please
Okay.
go ahead.
Okay. So I'm going to go on to the second myth.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Which is Russia miscalculated its military strategy in its invasion of Ukraine. So numerous military analysts, including Scott Ritter, disagreed with the mainstream narrative of the Battle of Kiev, the battle for Kiev. They argued that Russia's advance on Kiev was not a genuine attempt to take the city, but a feint, that's F-E-I-N-T, feint, designed to tie Iranian forces down in and around Ukraine's capital, while other Russian forces shaped the battlefield in the Donbass, the Russian military's principal objective. When the West has said Russia lost Kiev, based on the numbers that Scott Ritter and others reported about the relatively small number of troops Russia placed near Kiev compared to the number of Ukrainian troops there, it was a ratio of 1 to 3. Russia is not stupid. Russia didn't fail because they didn't plan to take over, because they didn't fail because they didn't plan to take over Kiev. In my opinion, I agreed with that analysis. Alan, was there going to be another a video shown now?
If you want to just go ahead and finish up, are you done with your?
I'm basically finished with my comment.
I think what I'd like to do is let's open it up for some discussion here. So again, I want to emphasize to everybody, especially those of you who've been to our sessions before, this is not an hour of presentation followed by an hour of discussion. This is really a discussion session. So what I'd like to do is if people would, if you want to chime in and raise your hand and comment or raise questions about some of the points that have been made so far about both the propaganda campaign as well as the narrative around the motivation or what's behind the war, I should say, please go ahead. So people want to go ahead and so Yusuf, if you would start, let me enable allowing, go ahead and unmute.
Thank you. Yeah, well, my comment is that Lenin deliberately included that what's now Eastern Ukraine as part of Ukraine was to give the republic a more proletarian character. That's where most of the industry is located. It's more, whereas the rest of the territory is mainly agricultural. And so there was a class reason to strengthen the hand of the urban proletariat in the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. So that was the motive. The purple that was quote unquote annexed by Stalin was formerly part of Imperial Russia, but grabbed by Romania or I believe by Romania during World War I. So that was actually a reclaim to Ukrainian territory. Khrushchev gave away the Crimea without proper procedure to the Ukraine, and the reason was that it was made some coordination of certain economic resources more efficient. But it apparently it wasn't done in according to full procedure. So that was a downright error.
Okay.
Thank you.
Next up is Kit, followed by Jean, and then Norma. And try and keep them comments somewhat, a few minutes. Okay. So Kit, if you would go
unmute. Rich, could you lower your volume, please?
We're getting an echo on your end, Kit.
Yeah, Rich has his volume on. Yeah, I'd like to get a repeat on myth number 2. I was just trying to write it down and I couldn't keep up with Janet. And also I just wanted to comment on this unprecedented propaganda war. I was talking, or I should say, I was corresponding with another comrade about this, but he was criticizing me because I was saying that the propaganda war was at an all-time high, and he was saying it's not true because it was worse during the Vietnam War. So I wasn't, I was too young during the Vietnam War. So I was wondering what people think about those comparisons. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, can I just say what
Yeah, go ahead.
the second myth was? Russia miscalculated its military strategy in its invasion of Ukraine. And I'm posting links to the chat also.
Okay, as far as the propaganda campaign, I think one difference, and this I think others can comment about this. Certainly at the beginning of the Vietnam War, in the early stages, it was fairly unanimous. It was all part of the Cold War, anti-communist environment at that time. But over time, there were critics, even within the mainstream. People like I.F. Stone and Noam Chomsky that voiced opposition. There was some opposition. In this case, within the political establishment, at this point, I don't think that there is any opposition. The votes have been, the only people that have been not voting for aid are the mostly Republicans, I guess 40 or so Republicans in the House of Representatives. I tend to think, I myself personally feel that it's really quite a different situation. I'm curious what other people think. So go ahead, Gene, do you want to go ahead and chime in on that?
Yeah, thank you very much. And again, thanks for organizing this on a kind of spur of the moment almost. But let me just say first, remind everybody what Mark Twain said. He said that if you don't read the Times, you're uninformed. If you do read the Times, you're misinformed. And that poses a certain problem. And it means that what you need to do is seek out alternative sources of information, and they are there in spite of all these things that what are they, algorithms and so on. But you can sort these things out. And for example, there is John Mearsheimer, who is basically a bourgeois historian, international affairs expert. He has a very good take on what's going on there. And also, you can seek out sources like Chinese TV, CGTN, China Daily, and others to put together a much more realistic view of that. And, I have on my own webpage, I say I don't tweet and I don't do Facebook. And that's one way to keep a certain semblance of sanity, I think. But at any rate, I'll stop there, but have more to say later on. But thank you again.
Okay, Raj, did I accidentally lower your hand?
No, Yusuf covered what I was going to say. Thank you.
All right, Norma, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, Hisham has written a note saying he couldn't find how to put his hand up. I wrote him a note back telling him how, but he did have his hand up and put him in line with everybody. What I put my hand up to say is that what needs to happen, because we have a difficult thing to go through in our heads about what to do, I'm going to tell you what to do. We need to advocate. We need to tell people that we can reach, that we have to urge that Ukraine surrender and agree to stop attacking the ex-Soviet Union, Russia.
Actually, in the last part, we're going to have a full part on exactly that topic. So let's.
Oh, and also I have posted some brilliant commentary as usual in the chat.
Okay. And let's go ahead with Hisham. I'm sorry I didn't see you earlier. If you would go ahead and unmute yourself and make your comment, Hisham.
Yeah, I first I have a comment. Like when I joined, I don't know if you've seen this when you joined the Zoom session, and I mentioned this before in a previous meeting. When I try to join the Zoom session, I get a warning saying that this is like a dangerous page. Are you sure you want to go there, or something to that effect?
No kidding.
Yes.
Well, I guess it's true.
Yes. So we are being censored also. My question is like in the maps that were shown before by Janet, there are different areas. So I wonder, what are the ethnicities of these areas? Are they Ukrainians, or what is like the ethnicity distribution in these different areas? Are there like a pure like Ukrainian race or like Ukrainian people, or there are a mix? I know in the east there's a heavy presence of Russians, but how about the other areas? What are the ethnicities in these areas? That's my question.
Okay. Does anybody want to comment on that? No,
Can I-
think.
Yeah, I'd like to make some comments on that.
Well, can I just mention that there are other maps online where Ukraine is broken down by languages and you can overlay them sort of, so yeah.
Go ahead, Yusuf.
Yeah, well, there's no really. I reject the concept of race altogether. I mean, there's some distributions of alleles, but Russian and Ukrainian are quite similar languages, actually. Yes, there are some still some Crimean Tatars in Crimea, and Crimean Tatar is one of the 3 official languages of the Crimean Republic in the Russian Federation. And I think that in the Western Ukraine, there may be some Moldovans and Poles, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, to try to distill some of this, my understanding is that the ethnic Ukrainians for which Ukrainian is their primary language, obviously are focused on the West. Ethnic Russians are concentrated in the East. I think about 40% of the population, if I'm not mistaken, is consider themselves ethnic Ukrainians, and only about less than 20% are Russian speakers, again, focused on in the eastern part of the country. The voting patterns leading up to when NATO really got involved in interfering with domestic politics, it was fairly split because a lot of ethnic Ukrainians also speak Russian. So in terms of the ethnicity, it's sort of concentrated on the 2 sides, the West and the East, but it's kind of split down the middle in terms of Russian language versus Ukrainian language. Others want to comment on this? Any other comments on this?
Let me just mention that map was had been shared by Dr. Kozine as part of one of his reports. That's how I got it.
Okay, next up, let me pull this up, is Richard, followed by Trajan, followed by Nina. So Richard, if you would go ahead and unmute yourself.
First off, I didn't really think that the topic here was how Ukraine was divided up by languages, nor really is it about how Ukraine has been territorially conquered. It seems to me that I thought the topic here was how we've been misled by our media into these lies. And so, to get off on, I mean, we're sort of getting away from the topic, it seems to me. And I wanted to point out, I think I put in the chat that this whole campaign, this media campaign, goes back to like during World War II, and so we've been subjected to media influence for a very, very, very long time. On the other hand, I will say that polls indicate that the U.S. general population are not taking kindly to this. And in particular, last night, for example, I watched an interview of, in particular, the younger people who are getting very fed up with the myths that are being spoon-fed us, and they're trying to take matters into their own hands. And I'll second that by my observations at the Labor Notes Conference, where there's a whole bunch of young people who are not buying into what is being spoon-fed them, and they are taking, so I mean, there is hope on horizon. Whether we'll be alive for that hope to be realized or not is another issue. But nevertheless, I think we should once again get back on the topic of how, of what we're being spoon-fed and how do we take care of that. Thank you.
Okay, next I believe is Trajan, followed by Nina. So Trajan, if you would go ahead and unmute and make your comment. You're kind of muffled. Can you, is there a problem with your microphone?
Can you hear me?
Very muffled.
Can you hear me now?
Pretty rough. Go ahead. Is your microphone hidden?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, better. Go ahead.
I visit my aunt in Ustimovka near Kremenchuk, and she basically just spoke Ukrainian. And then when I visit my other relatives in Kharkiv, they, from that same area, they spoke Russian, but they spoke Ukrainian also. So the languages are used both ways. Let me say one other thing about propaganda. The mass media and politicians have covered up the Nazi element of Ukraine. The Azov battalion using the Wolfsangel symbol. Many of the captured Ukrainian prisoners, it's on Telegram, you should always download that app. The Ukrainian Azov battalion people that have been captured, many of them have swastikas, tattoos, also Adolf Hitler tattoos. They're just covered with them. And it's not just
we're actually gonna do this as a separate coming up
Oh,
next.
okay.
Good.
But I just wanted to bring up the cover up that it's disgraceful. And our politicians are covering it up too. So that's my comment.
Nina, if you would go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, I think I came in at a time when it's just a little confused here. What is it that, because when I came in, there is like not a presentation of what you're trying to say. If you could just clarify this from the beginning. I came in at about 10:20, it seems to me. So I'm trying to understand a little better what is the thesis here.
Okay, what we're doing today is a special session discussion debunking the US NATO myths on Ukraine. So Janet, if you would go ahead.
Yeah, the point of my showing that map was the myth was that the US is saying Russia is trying to, it's a war of conquest. And on the contrary, Russia and the USSR, well, historically annexed territory to Ukraine. That's, yeah.
I have a hard time understanding how you can, how should I say,
I'm having trouble. You're not coming across, Nina, your microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is it? Can you hear me at all?
No, it's not coming across. Sorry.
Oh.
Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to move on to the next section here, which is the myth that the Russians saying that Ukraine, that there's a Nazi problem in Ukraine, is a propaganda ploy, which is being used to justify their military takeover of the country. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to start this by sharing a video with you. And actually, Janet, if you would give a little bit of background on this UN video that I'm going to show. Just real,
Yes.
real, yeah.
Okay. On July 11th, not too long ago, Russia, the Russian Federation, called a meeting of the UN Security Council, and it was called UN Security Council ARIA Formula Meeting, Neo-Nazism and Radical Nationalism, Exploring Root Causes of the Crisis in Ukraine. And it was the Russian charge d'affaires, Dmitry Polansky, delivered this an introduction that you're about to hear, and chaired the meeting. And we'll play it, and then I want to make just a short comment after.
Excellent. So let me go ahead and share my screen, and we can show this. Okay, can you all see it now? Okay, let me maximize up here and play it.
Since denazification is one of the objectives of our special military operation, which Russia started on 24th of February. I have to remind you that Russia, together with other Soviet republics, including Ukraine, suffered immensely from Nazism and fascism in the 20th century. During the Second World War, we lost at least 27 million people. That means almost every family in the post-Soviet space lost its loved ones. The USSR was in ruins. Our population faced immense barbarism from German Nazi occupiers, which was documented and exposed, inter alia, by the famous Nuremberg Tribunal. I am recalling this here to explain why the rejection of Nazism and fascism is so deep in our people's DNA. We celebrate Victory Day as the biggest national holiday. We honor veterans, those who passed and those who are still alive. For us all, this is not a distant past. It is forever living memory. Any manifestation of fascism is very painful for our eyes and ears. It wouldn't be an over-exaggeration to say that we have zero tolerance to it. That is why we were extremely worried to see clear signs of the resurrection of fascism in our neighborly Ukraine. How did it get there, one may ask? How could have Ukrainians, whose grandparents fought side by side with Russian soldiers against Hitler, fail to notice this dangerous trend? Resurrection of Nazism in Ukraine didn't happen overnight. One needs to recall that fascism, in the form of Hitler-loyal extreme nationalism, isn't a new phenomenon for this country. Back in 1941, German troops invading Ukraine were accompanied by Ukrainian nationalists from Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists and Ukrainian Insurgent Army, OUN-UPA in Russian. You can see women in national costumes, Vyshyvanka, hailing in Nazi salute, giving the Nazi troops most warm welcome.
There's an echo.
Here you can see Ukrainian nationalist women wearing traditional costumes march under the Nazi flags.
The voice is unintelligible.
These are Ukrainian nationalist women, collaborators, greeting the Nazis' arrival. Please memorize these images for the next time you see modern Ukrainian nationalist female activists wearing same Vyshyvankas and shouting glory to Ukraine.
Can you go back to the beginning where it
Here you
doesn't
can
sound
see
terrible?
OUN leaders astride a horse hailing to the Nazi military, carrying the flags with the Nazi symbols and the swastika. And the next one is the gates to Kiev with a banner welcoming Bandera and Hitler. Both are heroes. As you could see from these photos, OUN members eagerly collaborating with German Nazis driven by anti-Semitism as well as hatred for Russians, Poles and Bolsheviks. That was the basis of independent Ukrainian state that they were hoping to build with the assistance of the Germans. In a show of loyalty, they often surpassed their Nazi masters in cruelty and lust for bloodshed. Their participation in murdering hundreds of thousands of Jews, Poles, Russians, and fellow Ukrainians is well documented. The Ukrainian Nazi division SS Galiciana, whose insignia you can see now on the screen, was condemned by the Nuremberg Tribunal. By the way, today Poland marks another anniversary of the famous Volyn massacre perpetrated by the Ukrainian nationalists, which took the life of hundreds of thousands of people. After the defeat of Nazi Germany, Ukrainian nationalists were eradicated in Soviet Ukraine, but some of them managed to escape to Europe with fleeing German troops at the end of the war. Many of them later were picked up by the US and Canada as a potential tool in their Cold War against the USSR. I will abstain from giving any assessment of this shameful decision today and limit my words to saying that it had tragic consequences for independent Ukraine in 1991, when the ancestors of those nationalists and Nazi collaborators returned to Ukraine and started their slow but consistent revengeful crusade, which was given immense boost after the illegal Maidan coup in 2014. Today, after 30 years, it has contaminated virtually the whole of the Ukrainian society with the virus of Nazism 2.0 on top of extreme nationalism and Russophobia. We will have briefers today who will give a detailed account of this unfortunate and extremely dangerous development. You can see on the screen modern manifestation of this extreme nationalism and neo-Nazism. Colleagues, some of you may claim that we are exaggerating the scope of Ukrainian Nazism and will make reference to the fact that current Ukrainian president is a Jew. I agree it is difficult to reconcile one with another, but facts are solid and almost impossible to ignore. It is enough to mention that the leaders of Ukrainian nationalists and Nazi collaborators, Stepan Bandera and Roman Shukhevich, are now national heroes of Ukraine. Nazi insignia, like the skull from the Nazi Panzer Division Totenkopf, you see it now on the screen, and Schwarze Zone, are widely seen on Ukrainian military uniforms. This photo was published by President Zelensky, the one that you see, in his Twitter on a Victory Day on May 9, later deleted. Can you imagine a president of a country fighting Nazism 75 years ago posts such photos on a Victory Day, which is sacred for millions of those whose ancestors gave their lives to liberate Europe from Nazism? And on the second photo, you can see Ukrainian female military proudly wearing Nazi Schwarze Zone symbol. This photo was published in the NATO Twitter account to congratulate women on March 8. Another Nazi symbol, Wolfsangel, has been integrated into the insignia of the nationalist Azov battalion. Azov is on the right, as you see. The slogans of Ukrainian Nazi collaborators, "Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes," and "Ukraine above all," have become common. Nazi salute with raised right hand is widespread. Even the swastikas and German eagles with them are not uncommon. I want to show you a brief video prepared by my colleagues from Russian Embassy in London, where you will recognize many examples of what I just said.
Okay, I think we're gonna, Janet, if you want to make a few comments on that.
Okay, so following this introduction and presentations by his briefers with video documentation, the UN security member states had an opportunity to respond. Notably, the UK and the US trashed the report, saying Russia is misusing the UN for propaganda purposes. Polyansky's comment upon completion of the US comments was, quote, "Thank you. You didn't disappoint us, showing the face value of your position," end quote. Non-Security Council member states also were invited to respond. Only 2 did, Venezuela and Syria. Both gave very supportive responses to the presentation. And I'm going to post the a link or to that whole thing on in chat. I'm done.
Okay, so let's open this up for discussion. If people want to focus on the topic of Nazi influence in Ukraine and Russian motivations for their military operation. So people raise your hand, and if you have any comments, we can start with Kit. So go ahead and unmute yourself. I guess you're unmuted.
Okay, lower your phone, Rich. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. Yeah, I was having this conversation with somebody about this as well. And his position is that Russia is hypocritical because it has its own fascists, and Russia doesn't have a leg to stand on because Putin collaborates with Russian fascists and oligarchs. And this person I was corresponding with was said that he's been following this issue for 20 years. So I didn't know how to respond to that. Any comments, please?
Anybody want to contribute? Go ahead and chime in on that. Anybody?
Alan,
Yeah,
I would like to.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Mehmet. We can't hear you.
Richard has his hand up.
I know, but Mehmet was going to respond, but did he get cut off here?
Mehmet is still in. Mehmet's picture is there, so he should be able to speak.
We've lost his audio, I think.
No, I'm here. Is that what it is? I keep coming and going. So anyway, let me just say, if you can hear me, is that having fascists in a country does not make a country or its leader fascist. But once you incorporate the fascist brigades right smack into government, right smack into your army, then those fascists become official. That is what I'd like to say. We see this all around the world. The Proud Boys in the United States, they are fascist, but they were tried to be incorporated into the government by Trump. Didn't happen. But so that's the important, I think, the difference between the Ukrainian fascists and fascists around the world. Thank you.
That's one point. Others want to make comment on that? Go ahead and unmute and make your comment. I don't need to call on you, but please speak to that.
Yeah, I want to just add, this is Raj, I want to add to Mehmet's comment. In the capitalist countries, the ideology is nationalism. But there's a difference between nationalism which is progressive and a nationalism which is regressive and reactionary, and fascism is the most reactionary version of it. In Russia, I don't discern this thing in the national ideology. There are minorities live, there's no law against minorities. There's no language that is stopped in Russia. Russian nationalism is anti West nationalism because they perceive as being oppressed, they're being contained and blocked. So nationalism in Russia should not be confused with the nationalism of Ukraine, where the ideology of Ukrainian state is akin to some form of neo-Nazism, if not full-blown Nazism. But the presentation made by the Russian ambassador or representative at the UN shows that it actually represents a Nazi-like ideology, because Russians, children cannot be educated in Russian. And its own president is saying that the Russian children in Donbass should be afraid. And so there's no such thing in Russia. They have Muslims, the religious minorities. I mean, the defense minister of Russia is actually a Buddhist. And so just having a Jew as president here is what they have used as a symbol, because the Ukrainian neo-Nazism is different in that sense, or at least they're hiding it, the anti-Semitism right now, which is very tactical move. So I think it should be kept in mind that two are not equal. And whoever says, a longtime friend of mine, high school friend, very close friend, has been, whenever I raised it, he said, well, the Russian fascism, they are fascist. And so the propaganda is enormous. And just quick comment, the propaganda in the time of Vietnam War, and I was a young person here, was very intense initially, but it broke down because the unification of the monopolized system of information was not fully a thing, and the Vietnamese broke it. So today it's a little different, but there are alternatives like other media, CGTN, Russia, RT, and so forth. Thank you.
Okay, what I'm going to do here is I want to call on Trajan, because he has some background on the subject. Okay, cool. So Trajan, if you would comment on this specific question, I'd appreciate it.
Yes, as I mentioned before, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. As you said, the military, the Azov, are incorporated into the highest levels of the Ukrainian military. Politicians. Also, the left has been banned in Ukraine. There are no legal left parties. The Communist Party, just recently, all their assets were confiscated. You don't see that in Russia. But the crimes of these Nazis, Azov, there's a lot of documentation on Telegraph where Russian prisoners have had their eyes gouged out. I saw one yesterday. I showed it to my wife. They cut off somebody's head and held it. And I'm used to this crime, or hearing about this crime, because as I said before, when my mother was taken as slave labor, and she ended up in the concentration camp, and the meanest guards, worse than the Germans, were Ukrainian nationalists. She became disabled when she came to the US from all the torture and crimes. And she said to me once, they're beasts and animals. They used to rape the women in front of the other prisoners. This is what these people do. And there's a lot of documentation now of torture by these Ukrainian Azovs of Russian prisoners, shooting them in the legs. There was videos of that. They captured Russian prisoners and they shot them, and then they asked. And there's an IFC wrestler. He was a champion. They tortured him to death. They have it on video. I saw this a couple of days ago. They tortured him because he used Chechen trainers at before the war started. So they killed him because he's associated with some Chechens. This shows you this fanaticism in Ukraine, and the US is supporting this, and it's all covered up. Everything is covered up. All the politicians, every one of them, the congressman voted for $40 billion to extend this war. Everyone, even the squad, Bernie Sanders, it's disgraceful and disgusting. So we're supporting Nazis in Ukraine, and our mass media and politicians don't want to talk about it. That's my comment.
Okay, Janet, if you would go ahead and jump in with your response.
Yeah, well, nothing new about the US supporting Nazis, but I think Kit was referring to the Wagner group that I believe, I don't know whether it's banned in Russia, but it is, I think, made up of neo-Nazis. And I don't know whether they've been, they had to leave Russia. I don't know about that, but it's, I think, relatively small. But again, it is not official in the Russian government or anything, the military or anything.
Okay, Richard, if you would go ahead.
Yeah. One of the points of propaganda is to get people to fight against each other away from what really is the central focus. When I was watching that presentation, what struck me was how often I participated through like Memorial Day marches, and when I was playing music in the band, when I was in the Navy, marching in streets, marching in formation. Every year we have Memorial Day. I kept seeing myself in those presentations, and the point is that what they are talking about happening in Ukraine and Russia is happening back here, and we're talking about what's going on over there when we should really be focusing back here. So that was my comment. Thank you.
Okay, Yusuf, if you would make a comment, let's try and keep them brief because I want to move on to the next section. Go ahead, Yusuf.
Yes. Well, Zelensky campaigned on a platform of peace and reconciliation, and it's commendable that he was elected, but he didn't deliver. Instead he remained totally. He continued previous policies and extra. And America has had a black president, African American president. Doesn't mean there's no racism in America. And also the armed leaders of the armed Syrian opposition, they wear suits and ties. They live in luxury hotels in Turkey. But the main power is various factions of Al-Qaeda. So, or under various guises. The figurehead leaders don't tell you much.
Okay, Norma, if you would make comment.
Okay. I was at a meeting of our local Communist Party USA club the other day, and one of the younger people, a marvelous addition to our group, popped up behind something I said, saying, "Oh yeah, Hungary, they were hanging Jews." Because I was talking about, I've only just found out recently more detail about what's been going on against Russia the past 110 years. So referencing the Hungary thing. I got another comment, but I can't remember what it was. Thank you.
All right, so let me just summarize a few things here. I think there've been some good comments. First of all, Kit, I really appreciate that you brought up try to deepen the narrative, because I think it's important for us to address these questions. And I want to start off by saying, I think Mehmet made a very important point, which is that there are Nazi or fascist elements in many different countries, including Russia. But the question is, are they incorporated in the government and military structure? And Mehmet made a very clear point that in Ukraine, they are. They're incorporated. The Azov battalion was incorporated in the military, government officials, the internal security apparatus, many people from these ultranationalist Nazi right-wing groups are in the government and play a role. Then Raj actually brought up a couple of points that I don't think we should really pass over. Number one, this is not just, well, these groups are out there and, you know, they have their ideas and we don't subscribe to them, you know, so forth and so on. Raj made a point that there has been from the very beginning, from the Maidan coup, an initiative on the part of the Maidan coup government and successive governments to outlaw and restrict Russian language and culture, and to also ban, this is something that Trajan also brought up, to ban opposition parties. Right now, the legal opposition political activity is all related to these right-wing ultranationalist groups. Communist Party, different flavors of the Communist Party have been banned. People are being pulled off the streets. So this idea that, well, you know, there are, just like other countries, Nazis, but they don't really play a role. I think the people who responded to your point, Kit, I think did a good job of showing some of the differences. We could do a whole program on that. Let's move on to the next part, which is a little bit about the economic situation. So hold
Could
on.
I just add this
Yeah, go
one
ahead.
line
Okay.
that
Go ahead, Norma. Go ahead.
is that they're conflating aid to people who are escaping Ukraine with the content of the event, of the military effort, and they're two different things. And people say, help Ukraine, help Ukraine. Well, yeah, help the people that are escaping, but that's altogether different from the effort there.
And if Gene can just add one thing, I
Yeah,
had.
go ahead, Gene, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to that the comment on my man Bernie Sanders, and it is true that Bernie and the squad voted to support the funds, but so did the entire Black Caucus, and also the only people that voted against those funds for Ukraine were Republicans. I think maybe 80 or 100 or more Republicans in the House and Rand Paul. Now, these people, of course, are not people we want to support necessarily, but because I think when the time comes, they will jump on board the anti-China chorus. But I think we need to understand that the complexities of politics here in America, sick though they may be.
And just quickly, Zelensky is a Zionist, and there are Bandera and other statues and plaques all over Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important point. People, I don't know if people realize this, but Stefan Bandera's birthday is a national holiday by the Ukrainian government. And the road to Baba Yar, where there were hundreds of thousands of mostly Jews that were massacred during World War II, has been renamed in honor of Stepan Bandera. So this is not just fringe group activity. This is really significant incorporation into what current Ukrainian politics represents. NATO has gone in and allied with the nationalist right, but the ultra-nationalist right, the Nazi right, also plays a very big role in the government. And that cannot be, that's being sort of blotted out now too. I don't know if people have seen these reports, but a year or two ago, there were lots of articles in the mainstream media talking about the Nazi problem in Ukraine. And this has all been disappeared as part of the propaganda campaign. So it's very important. Let's move on to the next topic. And let me go ahead and read this myth. This is the second to the last. The myth is that the economic sanctions against Russia are working. The Russian economy is a shambles. Putin is isolated, and that the sanctions will eventually topple the, quote, Putin regime. And let me go ahead and address some points related to this. I think it's important to kind of put this in perspective. Yes, sanctions have had their toll on the Russian economy, but I think it's fair or correct to say that the sanctions campaign or the sanctions strategy has been a failure for two reasons. Number one, it hasn't had the impact domestically on the Russian economy that it was intended to sort of tank the economy, and I'll come back to this. And number two, there's a great deal of blowback that's taking place in the world economy, especially among the NATO allies who are spearheading this campaign against Russia, this proxy war against Russia, hurting them in many ways more than it's hurting the Russians. So let me just go into a few points related to this. Some interesting facts that I pulled up on this question to address it. The EU depends on Russian gas for about 45% of its imports and 40% of its consumption. Russia is by far Europe's largest supplier of natural gas. Russia's pipeline gas exports to Europe are equivalent to about 1/3 of global liquid natural gas trade. Let's think about this. Okay, so the amount of natural gas that goes from Russia to Europe consists of 1/3 of the total amount of trade in natural gas throughout the world. If Europe were to replace all Russian pipeline gas with liquid natural gas, it would need about 275 BCM, billions of cubic meters. That's the measure that they use for natural gas, based on Europe's balance in 2021. This is the important point. This represents more than 53% of the global liquid natural gas trade. Europe would also need to find alternative liquid natural gas sources to replace Russian liquid natural gas. So the idea, I think one of the points here is that the sanctions strategy on the part of NATO and the West was to cut them off from a source of revenue, when in fact what's actually happened is that Russian gas revenues and oil revenues have increased. The reason for this is that there's been some decrease in Russian exports as a result of the sanctions, although not as great, nowhere near as great as I believe they expected. But the price has also gone up, so it's compensated in terms of the revenue that Russia has earned from its post-military operation liquid gas exports. This is very much evidenced by the position of the ruble in the international currency system. One of the things that Biden bragged about early in the invasion was that they were going to crush the ruble. Well, the ruble today is basically, it's at 57. I checked it this morning, 57 rubles to the dollar. It's basically at where it was at prior to the beginning of the Russian military operation in Ukraine. In fact, it had actually dipped down into the 30s. The Russians had to enact measures to keep the ruble from dropping further, because potentially that can actually harm their economy. They bolstered it back up. So this aspect of the economic campaign against Russia has been a real fiasco. In the meantime, the sanctions have played a significant role in fueling inflation, especially in Europe. Like I said, very much dependent on gas and oil imports from Russia. Gas and oil play a very important role, not only in end consumption, private consumption or personal consumption for heating and transportation, but also as inputs into their economies. And countries like Germany and the Netherlands, Spain, and Italy, it's causing tremendous strain on both their monetary system, inflation is rising, but also having a depressing role on their economies in general. It's actually pushing them more strongly in this trend towards recession that's gripping the entire capitalist world today. So this has really been a tremendous failure, in my view. The Russian economy is not doing that badly. Their inflation rate is comparable. We have about 9% inflation here in the US. The Russian inflation rate is fairly comparable to the inflation rate in the US and throughout Europe. Their GDP decline, they have taken a hit on it, but it's not collapse. And the last thing I'm going to say is that the role of the sanctions was to undermine the Russian government, right? That's what this whole war is really about. It's about undermining the current Russian government, replacing it with more of a Boris Yeltsin type of government. Well, Putin's popularity is actually quite strong right now. Some of the polls that I've read, I haven't looked at them in the last week or two, but his popularity ratings are up at around 80%. And I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that many Russians they understand what this war represents to them. So just to summarize what I have to say on this, and we'll open it up for some comments and further points. Really, two things have happened here. The sanctions have had less of an effect on the Russian economy than NATO, the US expected. And it's having more of an effect on the world economy in terms of oil price increases, fueling inflation, food shortages, and things like that than they expected. So it's been kind of it's really been a bust. And I think we're seeing the political ramifications of it in countries all over the place, everywhere from Sri Lanka to Biden's dropping popularity ratings. The Italian government fell yesterday, all kinds of upheaval. And I think that this is going to be a major factor. So people want to make comments. Go ahead and let's see, anybody have your hand?
Alan, can you, there's also China in the mix.
Go ahead.
Could you play that 10-minute clip?
I think we're running a little bit late. I think some people have some
Really
comments.
important.
And Iran, if I may.
Yeah, and Iran. So let's go ahead and start with comments.
I'll put it in the chat.
Go ahead. Okay, great. Jean, why don't you start? And then was that Richard that chimed in? I don't know. Somebody chimed in. Laura, go ahead.
So am I on? Okay, let me just say, yeah, I think your point about those sanctions are hurting us, United States, much more than Russia. And if you look at our inflation rate, again, it's hitting people very hard when they go to the gas station, which I drive a Prius, so it doesn't bother me. But the other thing is, this gas consumption should be making people aware of the disastrous ecological effects of our gas consumption on the environment, on global warming, and so forth. So we need to look at the other side of this also.
Okay, Laura, if you would go ahead and you haven't spoken up, please make your comment.
Okay, I was talking to somebody yesterday, Jonathan Knack, who lives mostly in Ecuador, and he was talking about the effect on the world economy. In Ecuador, they export bananas, and there's resource extraction that is a big problem with all countries all over the place. And Ecuador is one of them. And then they also grow crops like bananas. And Russia and the Ukraine were big markets for that. And there was a price went from $6.50 down to $1 something, to where the people didn't even try to export it, just give them away. So it's having that kind of an effect, and it has that ripple effect on then Ecuador needing to look more toward resource extraction, which is something that the indigenous population of Ecuador does not want, and almost nobody, anybody would prefer to have it not be happening the way it is around the world. But so it has that ripple effect just over and over again to tanking economies that you wouldn't even necessarily think of.
Kit, do you want to, you had your hand up. I guess Kit has dropped off. Okay.
Oh, wait, no,
yeah,
hi, this is
go ahead.
Kit.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to concur with Eugene about his view, and that it is out there, especially among environmentalists and progressives, that all countries must get off of this gas and oil dependency because of global warming. But I just wanted to say that. That's all. Thank you.
You know, I just wanted to add one more quick point on this. There, a lot of people have been wondering, a lot of people really know what's going on and been following what's taking place, are wondering, how is this wall of propaganda, how is this political wall going to come down? And I think that one of the things that's operating here is this blowback from the sanctions and the economic distress that it is generating, that's causing a great deal of political upheaval, both in Europe and around the world. Just want to mention one thing. I was talking to an Iranian friend the other day, and he was saying that what's happened is that Iran and Venezuela have really stepped up their cooperation on economic matters and even military matters, in that the Venezuelans are dependent on U.S. technical, the equipment in their oil industry is U.S. based, and the Iranians are actually giving them aid and setting up formal cooperation. So there's a lot of push into people cooperating together. And this really brings us to our next point, which is going to be the next myth, which let me give you that one, that the world is united against Russian aggression in Ukraine, and Russia is isolated and growing more isolated. So Raj, if you would go ahead and speak to that. And then this is actually our last myth that we're going to be dealing with. We can open it up after that. Raj?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. You can hear me now? Okay, so I have put the bullet points of what I was going to say in the chat. So those who want to watch it, I mean, read it there, they can, but I'll go through all of them. So the myth is, and a lot of people in America have been led to believe that the world is united against Russia, but it isn't. So first thing is that world today is largely a capitalist class-led, exception being China, Vietnam, North Korea, Laos, Cuba. Another 13 countries has socialism in their constitutions, but they're not socialist. And however, 3 of these 5, even the socialist countries, that is politically governed by a communist party, but private or state capital exploits workers, leading to accumulation of capital, are not really socialist as socialist theory says it ought to be, which is not to engage in exploitative thing and basically economic activities for the benefit of building society towards transitioning to communism. So all the 13 countries with socialism, the constitution, India is one of them. So they're also capitalist economies. So basically we are in a world of capitalist economy. Now let's come to BRICS, which is a population of 3.3 billion people. So it's over 40% of 8 billion total world population. It's not with the so-called word united against Russia. So 40% is right there, right? The Argentina, Egypt, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Turkey will likely join BRICS within the next year. Algeria, Indonesia, Mexico are also likely to join BRICS. So these countries are also largely not with US, EU, NATO against Russia. Basically, they have their national interest. India, for example, has its national interest, so does Turkey. But Turkey, like India and Turkey, they're playing their national interest. Rest of Africa, Latin America, and substantial population is not with NATO-led war. Most of the Middle Eastern countries are not. So who's left? It is the EU countries and Canada aligned with the US with combined population of around 1 billion out of 8 that are led by the capital leaders who are against. Now the population is being misled by heavy propaganda. That's why the propaganda has to be so powerful, because it is at all not in their interest to be going against Russia, because they are paying with their pocketbooks and future life, you know. So India, which imported less than 2% of its oil from Russia before February 24, will soon be getting 25% of its oil imported from Russia. Why? Because it's discounted price of 30%, and the Russians pay for shipping, so it's a great deal for India. China is the #1 importer of Russian oil and will be of its gas as well. So what it's leading to, there is a division of the world following World War II that was between capitalist US-led and socialist USSR-led, which collapsed in 1991. And a unipolar moment arose in which the US became the only imperialist hegemon. And that's when they started dreaming end of history, began to dominate the world, attack whichever country they wanted to, destroyed Iraq, Syria, nearly destroyed Syria, destroyed Libya, so on and so forth. So but that moment in history is a fleeting moment. I mean, it's a period of, decade and a half. It ended with the Great Recession, okay? So unipolar world ended, but a multipolar world is not in the making, despite what is claimed by the leaders of Russia, China, and some others. Just as Lenin had argued against Kautsky that ultra and super imperialism is impossible. Lenin argued that because of the law of uneven development under capitalism, it is not possible to have one country become super imperialist and dominate everybody for the rest of the history of the world. I mean, in the future. So also impossible is multipolar world, in my opinion, for the same reason. Okay, because the law of uneven development under capitalism makes that multipolar world also impossible, because the bipolar bloc formation process takes place, because if you have one powerful pole, what happens is as another competitor arises, they coalesce around the other one. So there, some will go here, some will go there, some will be in the middle like India has been, but that's what's going on. So the US-led bloc, US, Canada, EU, NATO is attempting to stop this process. And this process began, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, but really it's been going on for the last 30 years or so, since China emerged as a powerful economy. So the US is trying to block this formation of the other pole and a challenger, which is in its doctrine for doing that. And that's why it is actually encouraging, arming Ukraine, moving NATO to the east, trying to weaken Russia, and then it will go after China. So this is what is behind the Ukraine war. Ukraine war was imposed, but imposed not by Russia. It came out of US attempt to continue to dominate the world, which is failing. Thank you.
Okay, so let's have some response. Janet, if you want to go ahead and respond, Janet.
Yeah, so Scott Ritter, again, I mean, the video I posted, he talks about the NATO summit, and basically said that that was a whole propaganda event. They had all kinds of maps and charts and whatever, but it's empty. That NATO is very weak, and the G7 also is weak, and I very encourage you to listen to that video because he says it much better than I can. But the European countries are so dependent on Russian gas and oil they're starting to back out of the sanctions, and so anyway, it's the U.S. Scott Ritter basically says that NATO is not capable of doing all the kinds of things that they are claiming, and so we're being made afraid of how powerful NATO is and all that. Anyway, I'll stop there.
Okay, next
And
up
we
is,
have to
next up
kill
is-
somebody.
Excuse me, hang on. I'm trying to run the meeting here.
Yeah.
Next up is Hisham, followed by, I'm sorry, then we'll have Jean and then Laura. Okay, so go ahead, Hisham.
Yeah, I just want to say that this session was about the American propaganda machine. And I just want to say that I think somehow we are losing badly against it. And I think we all know that. The example is in my family. I have 3 kids. They're all professionals, very educated. One is doctor, one works for Amazon, one is, works for Salesforce. And I even don't dare to speak in front of them about what we're talking about here. That you know, like the Soviet Union had, I mean, Russia had their legitimate fears about the expansion of NATO to the West. Especially, they lost like, even like my imagination, they lost maybe more than 1.5 million just like losing Kiev, defending it, and regaining it back. Although, you know, when it comes to Palestine, they're very enthusiastic, and you know, they support Palestine, always publishing about it against their own will. But even within my home, you know, I can't convince my children that, you know, they are listening to propaganda and they need to think again about it. And I feel the reason for that is just like probably like at least like most American kids, and maybe even me and maybe some of us, like now we're used to read like very short paragraphs or memes, and you know, like that gets very more effective than just like listening to like long articles. I mean, reading long articles or listening to meetings like this. So frankly, I'm desperate about, you know, like making a dent in this like American propaganda, in at least within America, at least. That's my comment. Thanks.
And actually, let's come back to that at the closing for this, because I think that's a really important point. Hopefully today is helpful to you for at least framing the questions and getting some information. Jean, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I really appreciate Raj's comment here. And I have great respect for my comrades' knowledge of Leninism, and no one knows Lenin better than Raj, I don't believe. However, I would also stress that he seems to think that scientific socialism, you know, stopped with Lenin. And in fact, it's continued to evolve. And if you look at what's going on in China today, you'll see that far from exploiting its workers, it's lifted 800 million people out of poverty. It's one of the primary forces in terms of the ecological revolution, trying to make an ecologically sustainable society. Unlike the United States, it hasn't started a war, aside from that unfortunate disagreement with Vietnam. So I think if you look at what China is doing objectively, you will see that it is one of the leading forces in terms of opposition to the hegemonic role of US imperialism. So, and I'm sure Raj and I will discuss this much more later on, but I just wanted to express my views there.
Okay, let me go ahead and we'll go with Laura. Go ahead, Laura, if you would.
Okay. So I'd put my one question in the chat, which was, unipolar, multipolar, maybe I missed what Raj said. What are the other options if it's not unipolar or multipolar? But also I wanted to say that what's so strange about the peace movement becoming involved at all is that in a way, the fact of this being so much a proxy war, and that the US being able to hide its aggressive role, providing weapons, not really providing soldiers. And of course, there isn't the draft that, the question that came up about how is this different from Vietnam, the draft, there is no draft, but there are no soldiers that we're sending. And it's similar to a lot of, the US, they've come up with so many ways in Latin America over and over again where they can hide behind the skirts of the local governments or whatever and not look as if it's the aggressor when it is. But so that's just a vague comment, but the question is, so what? Unipolar, multipolar, what? Thank you.
Okay, Richard, if you would go ahead, followed by Kit. Richard?
Yeah, I just wanted to warn a little bit about relying on Scott Ritter. As much as I like him, he's still basically a military analyst, and he's not really. He's certainly not a Marxist, and so he doesn't really analyze things in terms of class. Which brings me to my second point. It seems to me that one of the things about Marx is that he talked in terms of the four great classes, not just two classes. It wasn't just the proletariat versus the bourgeoisie. There were also the lumpen in there, and the petit bourgeois, and presumably other classes that he didn't really talk about. As an analogy to that, and strictly as an analogy, it seems to me we've got to talk about a multipolar, at least in the near future, a multipolar political world. So it's not just the U.S. versus against the Middle East, the Russia, Iran, China triangle. It's really once again I think we're coming back to a multipolar universe, and so. And once again, I use that strictly as an analogy. Thank you.
Okay, what I'd like to do is let's have Janet and then Raj, you make some comments, and Kit. And go ahead, Janet, if you would go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to respond about Scott Ritter. Yes, he is a military analyst, and but so much of what is going on has to do with military capabilities and what actually is happening militarily, and so his input is very valuable, I think.
Okay. Next up is Raj, if you want to make a comment, if you want to respond.
Yeah, first of all, clarification. What I was saying is that multipolar world is not possible in the era of capitalism. We are living in the era of capitalism. And this was the argument Lenin made against Kautsky in the other way. So the point is, under capitalism, basically, every country is organized, capitalism is organized around a nation state. And they band together with the strongest, just like wolf pack, and they prey upon others, okay? Now, the question is, is multipolar world possible? Yes, it is possible under socialism, but not under capitalism. Now, Gene's argument is that the analysis didn't stop with Lenin about what is socialism, but in fact, it goes from Marx. So if you believe in Marx, you then believe in Lenin, and Marx basically makes it clear the exploitation is where the wealth is accumulated in the form of capital. And Lenin said at certain stage, it becomes imperial because at that point it's overproduction. They just do all kinds of games, but basically lose their esteem. It's no longer a dynamic system. Capitalism is a very dynamic system, not in a good way, but it's dynamic, okay? So the point is why it cannot be multipolar world is because there is a big hegemon against which everybody then bands who the hegemon is trying to suppress. And the one who is to lead it will have to be another powerful country, which is China. And economic essence is the one that is primary. Military is important, but it becomes a kind of basically out of it arises. And so here with Russia and China combined, which is basically they're more than an ally, a powerful pole has emerged. India is trying to play both sides. Many countries are trying to avoid dealing with a 1,000-pound gorilla that the United States is. So they're trying to hide and this and play a double game. But ultimately, it'll be between two blocks. And I think US is in the decline and European capitalism is in the decline, whereas the capitalism is in the East is emergent because of the population. So that's my comment.
All right, Kit, if you would go ahead and if you have a comment or question.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I was listening to a program with Phyllis Bennis, who I have a lot of respect for, but you know, she was also putting out some of these views about that were coming from the left. I think she was doing these summaries. But I had mentioned the issue about the gas and oil, you know, the countries getting off of gas and oil. I remembered that she was saying that that the left should support the blockade on the Russian oil because of this environmental issue. But another disturbing thing that she mentioned was that Marxists should take the stand of non-intervention and self-determination, calling for peace in Ukraine, which I thought was also a dangerous line to take. I'm just hearing that you know, we're just a bunch of tankies here, and that ICSS is irrelevant because of our view. But I feel that there's a lot of anti-communism out there among the left, and anti, you know, Stalin. They blame a lot of things on Stalin. So, you know, these are things that, you know, come back to us that we need to get more educated on. And I know that Grover Fur is coming back next week. Thank you.
Okay. Gene, if you would keep a real brief comment, because I want to move on to the last
Yeah,
part.
I just wanted to tell everybody that Raj and I will continue the discussion next week, in which we're both discussants there. And although I don't, quote, believe in Marx, I think it's very important to read him carefully, especially his letter to Wiedemeyer, 1854, where he talks about the dictatorship of the proletariat. So, but we'll continue this discussion, and thank you, Raj.
Raj, I can't hear you.
Oh, okay. I was suggesting Janet to fill in while Alan is away, and if Janet doesn't want to do it, I can act as a anchor, or Mehmet. Maybe Mehmet, you can step in for Alan.
Mehmet wrote that he got tossed off. He is unable to deal with Zoom, and Alan seems to have been momentarily lost as well.
Okay,
so
I could, I mean, just,
go ahead, Janet.
well, I mean, does anybody else have their hand up?
Yeah, I'm going to put my hand up. Okay. Just to say, I posted early on that the recommendation, in order to have some way of analyzing this and have some focus on it, I looked for, well, what do we do? And what we need to do is tell whomever we can that we need Ukraine to surrender and to agree that they stop carrying on the Western powers' assault on Russia, which of course embodies to a degree the Soviet revolution, the Russian Revolution.
Okay, thank you. So I think what
I think Yosef
Alan wanted-
is there. Yosef still wants to say something.
Yeah, well, could I make some comments about the the propaganda that people, the suppression of the alternative narratives, or is it? Will there be a presentation on that first? Or? I mean, I'd like to comment on that, or if it's if time is appropriate.
Go ahead. Nobody else.
Well, yes. I think it's really full-scale censorship. I mean, they've cut off RT and many alternative media to present. Just they even get alternative information, which is, I think, a gross violation, outright censorship and suppression of freedom of the press and speech. But this trend, well, to a certain extent, was during 1967 against Israel, but that was sort of confined to the United States. Because then there was Soviet Union and China. But it started, I would say, with Iraq, where even in the left, it was almost, I know from myself, I tried to present some of the situation from the point of view of Iraq. And in sort of Saddam, Iraq was entrapped into invading Kuwait. The ambassador, U.S. ambassador, told Saddam, was instructed to tell Saddam that this was an affair that United States had no interest in, they wouldn't take sides. But it turned out that this was a trap. But it was impossible, even in the left, to get a alternative narrative. But it really started the full-scale concerning Yugoslavia, where everybody was cheering on the relentless NATO bombing. And ever since, the US, the propaganda machine has become very sophisticated and has adopted some of the slogans of the left, or especially the new, quote unquote, new left, to its own, to present the narrative to its own advantage. And then, like much of the peace movement was saying, parroting that Maduro was a dictator, and so on and so forth, even if they planned for peace. So this has been an ongoing problem in the peace movement to basically accept the imperialist narrative. Of course, in the case of Ukraine, it has gone down to outright censorship of alternative viewpoints. Thank you.
Okay, I have been kicked off the meeting and I can't actually
Can't hear you.
Really get back in, so I'm not sure. Maybe I've reached my Zoom, so I'm actually in the same household on a different machine, different user. Janet, you're muted.
We can hear you, Ellen.
Yeah, but
You're kind of in and out a little.
okay.
But
So I think maybe what we should do is wrap up.
well,
So-
what we didn't get to was where do we go from here?
That's true. I missed the last few minutes.
Right. We didn't get to that. So
Why don't we just go ahead and spend the last few minutes on that, and people want to make a comment, please go ahead. So
I told you what to do.
and actually,
Everything.
Janet, if you could go ahead and take over on the moderation, I think that would be good since I'm having connection problems. Okay.
okay. So 1 second. I see Richard's hand up, and Norma, you had wanted to.
No, I inserted my comments.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Richard, then Yusuf.
Well, I wanted to comment on something that Yusuf observed in passing, and that really might bear a future episode. And that is I think what we're doing is we're witnessing the impact of property rights on really the fundamentals of the Enlightenment. So that we're now seeing the dissolution of, for example, demonstrations. That stems directly out of the Magna Carta's right to petition the government, and we're starting to witness the inability of that to have any impact. The same thing's true of the courts. Once again, you're seeing a lot of people getting going before courts, if they even go before courts now, and being acquitted for various reasons. And a lot of that, to me, is a consequence of the rights of property impacting all that. So I think what we're seeing is the unraveling of roughly 400 years of a philosophical basis. And I'll just shut up at that point. And I will say that may be worthy of a future program.
Okay, Yusuf, and then Eugene.
What I want to say is sort of what is to be done. Well, I think one inroad we do have, and I think is the effect of this on the economy. I mean, there's a huge amount of money being diverted now to military spending under the guise of strengthening NATO or aiding Ukraine. And this is affecting the everyday there's runaway everyday livelihood of people that they could understand, that they feel, and they're going to get angry about, and they are getting angry about. So so that's my suggestion. We could focus on hammering that this war is costing you.
Thank you, Eugene.
Yes, there I am. Yeah, I just want to, I'm wearing my Veterans for Peace hat. And as many of you know, Veterans for Peace is an organization dedicated to the abolishment of war. And our patron saint is this fellow Smedley Butler, who wrote this excellent book, War is a Racket. And I urge people to read that. But in there, he makes the point very clearly that United States should not send any troops abroad. They should be kept within the United States unless there is, in fact, a declaration of war. Not that he's in favor of the United States declaring war, and certainly we are not. But, you know, our position is, first of all, bring our troops home. Just bring them all back home, the United States. There should be no troops, US troops in Ukraine or Europe or anywhere else. And secondly, abolish NATO. From the very beginning, that has been an anti-communist institution. And finally, US out of Eurasia, both Ukraine and China, Taiwan, South China Sea, and so forth. So I just want to say that's our position from Vets for Peace, and I urge people to examine this more fully. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Raj?
Yeah, you said, okay, so where do we go from here? I think our program is part of that, pointing out where ICSS programs, even though it may be minor in volume in terms of how many people see it, but when time comes, it becomes powerful, and time is coming. I think half the people in the United States are having a difficulty making the ends meet. About 40% of the renters, which is not 40% of the population, are unable to pay their rents, which have gone up because of inflation and all this sucking of the money from the top. Food problems are now existing among people. You know, there are food banks, etc. So these are indication of a declining empire that is US capitalism. When we talk empire, not the country, but the nature of its capitalism. Compared to that, Asian countries like China, China has not attacked any country. Jeannie is right in its peaceful rise since that time. But the point is, it is still capitalism. The problem is how it will express yourself when this other beast is gone. I mean, that beast may not be gone for a long time, but the other beast being the Western imperialism, which is origin is in colonialism. So its nature is much different, much more aggressive, much more militaristic. So I think this is the process of history where men and women come on the stage and overthrow the whole thing. And then as it has happened, so it'll happen again. So I think the process has begun. And the question is how effectively to help go along that direction, in which ICSS is a very small step. But there are others, comrades, and other people struggling for that. So I think that's would be my take on it. Thank you.
Okay, so Raj, I was wondering about the recording.
Yeah, let's wrap it up. Let me just say a few things. I'm back for now. I just wanted to thank everybody for participating in the session today. Again, I want to apologize for the last minute change in speakers and format. I think that some good information came out today. Hopefully this is the kind of thing that you can use in your day-to-day interactions with people and whatever political activities that you're involved with. We want to encourage people. We didn't get a chance to do the announcements, but we are going to have a session next week that's going to be going to some detail, another discussion session on the multipolar versus the unipolar world, go into some more detail on some of the things that came up today. The following week after that, Grover Furr will be speaking. He's one of our most widely heard and popular speakers. He's going to be speaking on Lenin's Last Testament. And also want to remind people, if you want to be notified of future programs, you can go to the ICSS Marks website, icssmarks.org, and sign up for our email list, and you'll receive a weekly email notification with the Zoom link for future sessions. And there's also a link on that homepage to make donations to ICSS and the Marxist Library to continue this work. So I think that what we'll do now is let's stop the recording, and if people want to hang around and have some more discussion, please feel free to do so. But this will be the sort of the end of the formal recorded, at least the recorded session. So Raj, if you would just stop that.
I just
Thank you
wanted
very
to
much.
yeah, thank you, Alan. But just wanted to point out that the first meeting in returning to the library would occur with the Grover first presentation on the 31st, and it'll be a hybrid meeting. So those who are not in local or cannot go or don't want to go because of COVID to the library can still attend it through Zoom. And then, but those who are coming there, so it'll be both. So after that, we'll see how it goes, depends on COVID and how that meeting goes. But okay, so I'm going to end the recording at this point, having gotten that okay from Alan. Okay, so it's going to stop now.
Institute for the Critical Study of Society at the Nebo Proctor Marxist Library receives no corporate funding, nor do we have any paid staff. We rely on the support of working class folks that share our commitment to the socialist legacy of Karl Marx. We continue to need funds to meet necessary expenses. Since we can no longer pass the hat at our in-person forums, please send contributions to our treasurer, either online via PayPal or by check. The PayPal ID is ICSS Sunday, SUNDAY, at yahoo.com, and the name is Richard Fallenbaum. And checks may be made out to Richard Fallenbaum and sent to him at 1225 Nielsen Street, Berkeley, California, 94706. Fallenbaum is spelled Fallenbaum. To donate directly to the Marxist Library, send a check to the Nebo Proctor Marxist Library at 6501 Telegraph Avenue, Oakland, California, 94609, or directly or donate online at www.paypal.me/npml. For information, write to npml at marxistlibr.org, and the website is marxistlibr.org.